It was past midnight when a knock on my door changed everything, and I wasn't ready for the woman upstairs to smile at me. It was past midnight, and the apartment was quiet except for the soft, rhythmic patter of rain against the window. I sat on the edge of my couch, half reading a book but mostly staring at the muted city lights, the sound of distant traffic mixing with the drizzle. The apartment smelled faintly of brewed coffee I had forgotten to finish, a comforting reminder of the day winding down. My thoughts wandered lazily, nothing pressing, until a soft, deliberate knock echoed through the hallway. My heart skipped. At this hour, a knock was unusual and polite. Hesitant, I rose, the floor cool beneath my bare feet, and moved toward the door. My hand hovered over the handle for a moment, an instinctive pause as a shiver of curiosity ran up my spine. When I opened it, she was there. I froze for a brief second, caught off guard by her presence. She looked like someone who didn't usually knock on strangers' doors, confident, poised, yet approachable. She was in her early 40s, with hair damp from the rain, falling softly over her shoulders. The faint gleam of moisture made the strands catch the light, framing her face in a way that made her smile seem even warmer. Her eyes met mine, steady but playful, like she already knew a secret she was willing to share. "Sorry to bother you," she said, her voice low and calm, with a hint of amusement. "I didn't know who else to turn to." I stepped aside, motioning her in, my pulse quickening more than I expected. As she crossed the threshold, I noticed the subtle details: the faint scent of her perfume, floral but understated, the gentle rustle of her coat as she shook off the rain. She moved with grace, every step measured yet effortless. There was something in the way she carried herself, a quiet assurance, that made me simultaneously nervous and fascinated. We lingered by the doorway for a moment, an unspoken hesitation in the air. She rested her hand lightly on the doorframe as she shifted her weight, and I felt an odd, inexplicable warmth at the simple contact. It wasn't intimate in a romantic sense yet, but it was enough to make the small apartment feel suddenly charged, as though time had slowed just for us. I asked the obvious question, my voice steadier than I expected. "Do you need something? Can I help?" Her smile widened slightly, an almost secretive curve that tugged at some part of me I didn't fully understand. "Maybe," she said softly. "I just needed to see a friendly face." For a moment, words felt unnecessary. The quiet hum of the city outside, the soft light of the hallway, the lingering warmth of her presence, all of it combined into a delicate, almost fragile moment of connection. I found myself stepping aside fully, inviting her in. And as she entered, shaking off the last drops of rain, I realized that something had shifted. A story was beginning, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for it, but I knew, in a way that startled me, that I wanted to see where it would go. After she stepped inside, the apartment felt smaller in the best possible way, as if her presence had filled the empty spaces with warmth. I offered her a seat on the couch, my hand brushing briefly against hers as I guided her toward it. It was a fleeting contact, but it left a subtle heat on my skin, a reminder that her nearness was already affecting me. She laughed softly when she sat, a sound that was both light and unexpectedly intimate, like sunlight slipping through a rainy window. I went to the kitchen to make coffee, the rich, bitter aroma filling the room. When I returned, I handed her a steaming mug, the warmth radiating into her hands. I watched her wrap her fingers around it, noticing how small her hands were compared to mine, how her knuckles flexed slightly as she held it. She blew gently across the surface, sending little waves of steam curling toward us. "Thanks," she murmured, and for a moment, her eyes met mine in a quiet exchange that seemed to linger longer than words. We started talking. At first, it was casual, observations about the rain, the city at night, but gradually, she began sharing snippets of her life, carefully measured but honest. She spoke of her work, her evenings often long and lonely, her voice carrying a soft vulnerability beneath her confident tone. I found myself leaning in slightly, drawn by the subtle tremor in her words, the way she hesitated before admitting small truths about herself. I told her a little about my own life, keeping the tone casual but genuine. I could feel her attention focused on me, The way she tilted her head slightly, eyes bright but calm, scanning my expressions as if trying to understand the unspoken parts of me. Every so often, her shoulder would brush against mine, or she would reach slightly across the small table to gesture at something, and the brief contact made my pulse skip. There was an easy rhythm to our conversation, a delicate balance of honesty and restraint. I noticed how she sometimes licked her lips before speaking, or how her eyes softened when she recounted a memory that carried quiet nostalgia. These small details grounded me in the moment, pulling me out of my usual overthinking, making me acutely aware of her presence, and of my own reactions. At one point, she laughed at a joke I didn't realize I'd made aloud, and the sound was so warm it made me smile without thinking. The atmosphere between us was calm, intimate, yet charged in a subtle, unspoken way, a quiet acknowledgement that there was something here neither of us had expected. When she finally stood to leave, our fingers brushed lightly as she moved past me. It was a fleeting, almost accidental touch, but the warmth lingered, echoing in my palm long after she'd gone. I closed the door behind her, leaning against it for a moment, realizing how much that simple evening, coffee, conversation, small gestures, had unsettled me, awakened something tentative and thrilling that I wasn't ready to name. And yet, despite the uncertainty, I already knew one thing: I wanted her to come back. The days after that first coffee felt different, though nothing about the city had changed. I started noticing her in small, everyday moments, in the hallway, descending the stairs, sometimes carrying groceries or a stack of books. It was as though her presence had imprinted itself into the rhythm of my life. One evening, as I stepped out to take the trash down, I found her struggling with a particularly heavy bag of groceries. Without thinking, I stepped forward. "Here, let me help," I offered, and she hesitated for a moment before letting me take the heavier items from her arms. The warmth of her hand brushed against mine as she passed me a bag, sending a small, electric shiver up my arm. Her fingers lingered for a fraction of a second, and I felt a curious combination of comfort and tension. We walked together to the elevator, side by side. She carried herself with that same effortless grace, but there was something softer in her movements now, a quiet openness I hadn't noticed before. I realized I was noticing everything: the way her coat brushed against her arm, the gentle tilt of her head when she laughed at a small joke, the subtle scent of her perfume, faint but familiar. As the elevator descended, our shoulders touched lightly. It wasn't deliberate, but it felt significant, a reminder that proximity could carry meaning. I caught her glance, brief yet loaded with curiosity, maybe even recognition of a tension we hadn't named. My pulse quickened, but I kept my expression calm, careful not to reveal just how much her nearness affected me. Over the next few days, this became our quiet routine. I'd help her with groceries when chance brought us together, and she'd respond with small smiles, brief touches, and gentle words of thanks. Each moment was simple, almost mundane, yet it carried a subtle current of connection, an understanding that went beyond casual neighborly politeness. One evening, while we were both waiting in the lobby during a sudden downpour, we laughed at the absurdity of being trapped together in the tiny space. She leaned slightly closer to share her umbrella, her shoulder brushing mine. I felt a quiet, unexpected thrill, a flutter of something I couldn't yet define. The laughter softened the tension, but the lingering warmth of her proximity remained. Inside, our parting was no longer abrupt. She lingered for a moment at the door, fingers brushing mine almost casually as she said goodbye. It was fleeting, a gesture that could have been accidental, yet it sent a wave of anticipation through me. I realized I was beginning to crave these small interactions, the shared smiles, the laughter, the moments when our paths crossed in unremarkable yet intimate ways. That night, alone in my apartment, I reflected on the strange comfort and gentle tension she had brought into my routine. It was subtle, almost imperceptible to an outsider, but to me, it felt like a shift in the rhythm of my life. I wasn't sure where it would lead, but I knew that each casual encounter, each light touch, was slowly weaving a connection I couldn't ignore. And even in that quiet realization, I felt a mix of anticipation and hesitation, the first true stirrings of something far deeper than neighborly friendship. It was late again, past the hour when the city feels most still, and I was sitting in my apartment, half watching a show, half lost in thought. The quiet hum of the refrigerator, and the occasional sound of rain tapping against the window were my only companions, until a soft knock at the door jolted me fully awake. My chest tightened slightly, a mix of curiosity and concern. When I opened it, she was there, shoulders slightly hunched, coat damp from the rain, her hair sticking lightly to her face. Her usual composed smile was softer, almost fragile, and I noticed the faint tremor in her hands. I didn't want to bother you, but... She hesitated, glancing down before meeting my eyes again. That pause, the slight vulnerability in her posture, pulled at something protective in me. I stepped aside wordlessly, gesturing for her to come in. The apartment, dimly lit and cozy, felt suddenly intimate. She perched on the edge of the couch, and I found myself sitting a careful distance away, though my body wanted to lean closer. We both seemed aware of the tension between comfort and distance, and yet there was no rush to fill the silence. I just needed someone to talk to, she said softly. Her voice was steady but carried an undertone of unease. I nodded, inviting her without words, and she slowly sank a little closer, resting her head lightly against my shoulder. The warmth of her hair brushing my chest, the subtle weight of her head, felt grounding, a delicate intimacy I hadn't expected but couldn't ignore. As she spoke, sharing worries and fears she rarely revealed to anyone, I listened intently. Every sigh, every quiet pause, made me more aware of the small details. The way her fingers nervously traced the edge of her sleeve, the faint scent of her perfume mixing with the comfort of my apartment, the rhythmic rise and fall of her breathing against me. It was a conversation of trust, one that bypassed the need for words in certain moments. Occasionally, she would shift, her hand brushing mine ever so lightly, perhaps unconsciously seeking reassurance. Each touch was fleeting but enough to make my chest tighten, a silent reminder of the subtle pull between us. I wanted to offer more, a reassuring squeeze, a gentle brush of hair from her face, but I held back, letting the connection build slowly, aware of boundaries and the delicate tension hanging in the room. Time seemed to stretch, measured in heartbeats and whispered confessions. She looked up at me once, eyes searching mine, and in that brief glance, I felt a shared understanding, an acknowledgement of the emotions neither of us had fully named. It was intimate, safe, and thrilling all at once. When she finally stood to leave, the brief contact as our fingers brushed against each other lingered in my mind long after the door closed. Alone, I realized how much that evening had affected me, not through grand gestures, but through quiet vulnerability, gentle touches, and shared honesty. I knew then that this connection, fragile and tentative though it was, had already begun to root itself deeply in both of us. Something was stirring, something that neither of us could ignore, and neither of us was quite ready to name. It was one of those evenings when the rain came suddenly, sweeping across the city in heavy sheets, drumming relentlessly against windows and rooftops. I had just finished tidying my apartment when a faint, hesitant knock came at the door. My heart skipped. I knew who it would be before I even opened it. When I swung the door open, there she was, coat clinging to her frame from the downpour, droplets running in tiny rivulets down her hair. I instinctively reached out, holding my coat open to shield her from the rain. "You're drenched," I said, concern threading my voice. She smiled at me, that effortless, quiet smile, and I felt a strange, thrilling warmth flood my chest. We stepped inside, and the smell of wet fabric mixed with the faint floral notes of her perfume. She shook off the last drops from her hair, and I noticed how the strands caught the dim light, framing her face like a delicate halo. Our eyes met, and for a heartbeat, the world outside, the storm, the city, the clock ticking relentlessly, seemed to disappear. She lingered near the door, hesitating, and I felt a pull to close the distance, to offer comfort beyond words. Finally, she allowed herself to step closer, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Our hands met, brief and tentative, the contact sending an almost electric shiver through me. I felt her warmth through that simple touch, and in that moment, it was impossible to ignore the tension building quietly between us. We moved toward the small living area, laughing softly at the absurdity of being caught in such a sudden storm. The sound of rain on the window created a private world around us, cocooned from the city's chaos. I noticed the little gestures, the way she leaned slightly closer when she laughed, the brush of her sleeve against my arm, the tilt of her head when she spoke, eyes meeting mine with unspoken meaning. I felt an ache in my chest, a desire that wasn't just physical but emotional, a need to be near her, to offer safety and warmth. Yet I held back, aware of the delicacy of this moment, aware that every glance, every light touch, carried weight. At one point, she glanced up at me, eyes soft, lips slightly parted in thought. I saw the same hesitation mirrored in myself, the tug between longing and restraint, between what we felt and what we dared to act upon. The rain continued outside, relentless, but inside, the silence between us was loud with possibilities. When the storm subsided and she reluctantly moved toward the door, our fingers brushed again, a gentle, lingering touch that spoke volumes. I felt a quiet, almost painful awareness that this connection, the closeness, the warmth, the tension, had deepened beyond simple neighborly friendship. I closed the door behind her, and the apartment suddenly felt empty and too quiet. I leaned against it for a moment, heart racing, hands still tingling from the fleeting contact. Something had shifted irrevocably between us. That night, the rain had washed more than streets. It had revealed the quiet, simmering attraction that neither of us could fully deny. After the stormy evening, everything felt different, though outwardly nothing had changed. I found myself replaying our shared moments in my mind, the accidental touches, the lingering glances, the quiet warmth of her presence. Yet, beneath the thrill, a steady current of doubt gnawed at me. The age difference, the unspoken social perceptions, the hesitation in our movements, all of it clashed with the pull of my emotions. It was during one of our routine encounters in the lobby that the tension came to a head. She was carrying groceries again, and I stepped forward, offering help. Her hand brushed mine as she passed me a bag, and the simple contact sent a familiar shiver up my arm. But this time, I couldn't ignore the knot of worry tightening in my chest. Was I reading too much into these moments? Was I imagining her hesitations and glances as something they weren't? Later that evening, she knocked again. I'd opened the door, and for a moment, we both hesitated, as if aware of the invisible line we hadn't crossed yet. I invited her in, and we sat facing each other on the couch, knees almost touching. The closeness was palpable, but neither of us made a move to bridge it further. Instead, we spoke quietly, carefully, words chosen with the precision of someone navigating delicate territory. She confessed her own doubts, hesitations, the fear of judgment from others, the internal conflict between desire and propriety. Her voice was soft but steady, each word weighed with honesty. I listened, my own worries mirrored in her eyes. I realized that the pull I felt toward her wasn't just about attraction. It was about connection, about understanding, about the quiet intimacy that had grown between us over time. Occasionally, her hand brushed my arm for emphasis, a fleeting, almost unconscious gesture that made my chest tighten. I wanted to take her hand, to hold it, to let her know I felt the same, but the unspoken rules of caution held me back. Instead, I settled for attentive presence, leaning slightly toward her, letting her know through posture and gaze that I was there, fully engaged. The room felt charged, dimly lit by the soft glow of a lamp, rain still pattering faintly against the window. Shadows stretched across the walls, reflecting the uncertainty and desire in our hearts. Every glance, every pause, every brush of hair from her face seemed amplified in that quiet space, intensifying the tension that neither of us could fully name. By the time she rose to leave, our fingers brushed again, hesitant, fleeting, but the electricity between us was undeniable. As she stepped into the hallway, I felt a mix of relief, longing, and frustration, relief at having shared the moment honestly, longing for more, and frustration at the invisible barriers holding us back. I closed the door and leaned against it, heart pounding, hands still tingling from the last contact. I knew that we were on the precipice of something profound, a connection that would demand courage, honesty, and vulnerability. The tension between desire and hesitation had reached its peak, setting the stage for the final resolution, a moment when both of us would have to confront what we truly felt. The night was quiet, almost suspended in time, as if the world had slowed to match the rhythm of my own anxious heartbeat. I had been restless all evening, thinking about her, about the subtle glances, the fleeting touches, the tension that had hovered between us for weeks. Then came the soft, deliberate knock at the door, unmistakable in its familiarity. My chest tightened, anticipation and relief mingling as I hurried to answer. There she was, calm, poised, and smiling, that smile that always seemed to carry both warmth and quiet mischief. The rain had stopped, leaving faint traces of moisture on her hair, but she looked radiant nonetheless. The sight of her made the room feel smaller and more intimate, as if her presence alone had condensed the world into this single, perfect moment. I stepped aside wordlessly, my fingers brushing the doorframe as I gestured for her to enter. She moved gracefully, almost naturally into my space, and for a heartbeat, neither of us spoke. The quiet hum of the city outside, the soft glow of the lamp, and the lingering warmth of our earlier conversations enveloped us. It felt like the world had condensed to just the two of us, a private universe built from weeks of shared moments, laughter, and vulnerability. Finally, we spoke, our voices low and measured. "I've been thinking about everything," she said softly, her eyes searching mine. I nodded, knowing exactly what she meant. The hesitations, the unspoken desires, the internal conflicts, they were all there, but now we could acknowledge them openly. Without a word, she stepped closer, and I felt her presence fully, the subtle warmth radiating from her body, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the air of the room. Our eyes met, and for the first time, there was no hesitation. Slowly, almost tentatively, she leaned in, resting her cheek lightly against my chest. I wrapped my arms around her shoulders, drawing her closer, feeling the quiet steadiness of her heartbeat against mine. Time seemed to stretch as we lingered there, hands brushing gently, fingers intertwining almost instinctively. Her hair tickled my collarbone, her breath warm against my neck, and I felt an overwhelming sense of rightness, a quiet, human connection that went beyond words or reason. The age gap, the outside world, the doubts, they all faded in the presence of this intimate honesty. We stayed like that for a long moment, sharing the simple but profound comfort of closeness. I whispered softly, letting her know that I felt the same, that the bond we had built, the careful steps we had taken toward each other, were enough to overcome hesitation. She smiled again, pressing her forehead briefly against mine, a gesture that carried both affection and relief. Finally, we moved to stand at the threshold, hand in hand, fingers laced naturally. Outside, the city slept, rain-slick streets reflecting the dim streetlights. Inside, we felt safe, warm, and connected. The tension that had defined our journey now transformed into a steady, comforting intimacy, a promise of what was to come, built on trust, patience, and understanding. And in that quiet midnight hour, with her hand in mine and her smile illuminating the space between us, I realized that we had arrived at something rare and beautiful, a connection that was equal parts desire, comfort, and deep emotional resonance. We didn't need words to confirm it. The shared warmth, the lingering touches, and the unspoken understanding said it all.